Now, this is our last video about Mendel genetics. So remember we were talking about genetics. We said there's always a dominant gene, and there's always recessive, and the dominant usually always masks the recessive, and that's it. But as always, biology had to be complicated, and there had to be a bunch of genes that wanted to break the rules. So this is kind of like the rule breakers category. So there's 4 different rules that we're going to break. And we're going to go through all 4 of these in this video. So first, let's talk about multiple allele traits. One example of multiple allele traits is your blood type. Hey, do you know what your blood type is? You should find out. Just in case it's an emergency and you ever need blood, it's always good to know your blood type. So the next time you get blood taken, ask your doctor, hey, can you tell me my blood type? Now, blood cells have these antigens on their surface, these little spiky things on the blood cell. And we'll talk more about antigens later in the semester. So there's 3 different types of antigens you could have on your cell. You could have the A antigen, which is this yellow triangle. You could have a B antigen, the blue triangle. Or you could have an Rh factor, which is this black square. Ever heard somebody say, like, I'm blood type A positive? Well, if they said that they're positive, that means they have this Rh factor antigen on their blood cells. For now, let's ignore the Rh factor so that we can keep it simple. There's actually 4 different blood types. You could be type A, you could be type B, you could be type AB, or O. For blood type, whenever you see a big I, that's dominant. So somebody could be I with an A or I with a B. This is blood type A and blood type B. This would indicate they have A antigens or B antigens if they have this A here. Both of these are dominant. They're actually co-dominant. If there's a little I, this is recessive, and there's no antigen when you see this little I. So for blood type A, if somebody has 2 I's with big A's, then they'll definitely have A blood type. However, if somebody just has 1 I with a big A and 1 little I, the little I is recessive, so the A is going to mask it. So even if you only have 1 big A, you still have blood type A. What about blood type B? Well, same thing, except there's a B antigen, so you're going to write it like this. If somebody just has 1 copy of the I with the B, and they have 1 little I, the little I is recessive, so it doesn't count. Only the B counts, so they'll also have type B blood. If you have type AB blood, that means you have 1 big A here, and you have another, and your other allele has a B. Because remember, these are co-dominant, so they both win together. So that would give you a type AB blood. If you're type O, well, guess what? You have 2 recessive genes, 2 little I's. So these are the phenotypes here, A, B, AB, or O. And on this side, these are the potential genotypes for each of the blood types. I rewrote them all over here for you. Now, if you want to find out the potential of offspring having certain blood genotypes, it's the same thing we've always done. Let's say that we had this father who had big B, little I, so they would be type B for sure. And this mother had 1 big A, 1 little I, we know that they're type A. Now to find out the possible blood types of their children, we do what we always do. We do a Punnett square, okay? So we put the egg here, big A, little I, the sperm on this side, the big B and the little I, and we cross them. And what we find out is there's a 25% chance the offspring will have type AB blood. There's a 25% chance the offspring would have B blood. There's a 25% chance they would have A, and a 25% chance they would be type O. So that's how you would figure out inheritance of ABO blood type. Okay, so that was the first rule breaker, the multiple allele trait. The next rule breaker is something called incomplete dominance. So incomplete dominance is when there's not one dominant or recessive gene, but instead they kind of merge together. So for example, if you have wavy hair, that means that you have 1 curly hair allele and 1 straight hair allele. But if you have wavy hair, it's like you have a hybrid of both. Another example in humans is if you have hazel eyes, it means you kind of have a mix of brown eye allele and green eye allele from different parents. So let's look at an example. So if this mother had wavy hair, okay, C1 means curly and C2 means straight. For incomplete dominance, we don't always do letters like capital and lowercase letter. they might do like this, C1 and C2. So if this mother had C1, C2 wavy hair, and the father also had wavy hair, and we were going to do a Punnett square across them, if this child got 2 copies of C1, they would have curly hair. If this child got 2 copies of C2, that's the straight hair allele, they would definitely have straight. But these two have one C1 and one C2, so they get a mix of straight and curly, they get wavy. So that's how incomplete dominance works. There's not one that's dominant or there's not one that's recessive. They just kind of mix together, form this hybrid. Our next rule breaker is something called polygenic inheritance. What this means is, remember how you normally have 2 chromosomes and I said there's like an allele on one and another, but maybe there's multiple alleles on one chromosome. Maybe you got 3 alleles for something from your father, but only 1 from your mother. And then they would add up. So basically there's multiple alleles for one characteristic. Let me give you an example. Your height. Maybe you have a mom who's really short, so you only got like 1 height allele from your mom. But maybe your dad's really tall, so you got like 5 tall alleles from your dad. And they add up in a certain way. So it's possible that you could be taller than both your parents, or it's possible that you could be kind of in the middle because maybe you didn't get all the tall alleles that your dad has. So once again, polygenic inheritance, it's governed by 2 or more sets of alleles and it's a quantitative effect. The effects are additive. For example, if we took everybody in our class and we all lined up by height, very few people will be 5 feet or shorter. Very few people will be 6'5" or taller. The majority of people will be somewhere in the middle, like 5'7", 5'8". And that's because of this polygenic inheritance. Most people have a certain number of genes that add up to a very specific height. Other things that involve multiple alleles other than your height are your skin color, your weight, your eye color. These are all involve multiple genes for that one characteristic. The final rule breaker is called pleiotropy. Pleiotropy is when there's one single gene that can affect multiple parts of the body. An example of this are genes for connective tissue. Your connective tissue involves your skeleton, your heart and your blood vessels, your eyes, your lungs, and your skin. So imagine if there was a genetic defect in a connective tissue gene. It could affect multiple parts of the body, including the height of the person, whether their heart or blood vessels are working properly, whether they have proper vision, whether they can breathe properly, and of course their skin, meaning the elasticity of their skin. There is actually a genetic defect that affects one gene in the connective tissue. So even though there's only one mutation, it affects all parts of the body, all of these parts, eyes, lungs, heart, skeleton. This syndrome is called Marfan syndrome. And I mention this because I know a lot of people in this class want to go into sports medicine or exercise science or physical therapy. And this is one of those things you got to look out for. So Marfan syndrome causes the individual to be very, very tall. They have extremely long arms and legs because of these connective tissue problems. Hey, guess what people with really long arms and legs make? They make great basketball players, right? Actually, many famous NBA stars and college basketball players had Marfan syndrome and they didn't even know it. Also, this is a really famous volleyball player, Flo Hyman. She was in the Olympics and everything. She had Marfan syndrome and she didn't even know it. But the biggest danger in this syndrome, even though the person is tall and they have a really athletic build, is this heart and blood vessel problems. A lot of times nobody even knows they have this syndrome. And then what happens, of course, they're out playing their sport and they have heart failure and they can die. They can have a heart attack. And Flo Hyman, this famous volleyball player I'm telling you about, she actually died on the court during a volleyball game from heart failure. So people with Marfan syndrome, even though they're extremely tall and athletic, they should not be overexerting themselves because of these heart problems. This is all due to one single gene, but it has multiple effects on the body. This is an example of pleiotropy.